Okay, I finally got my phone working here, so I can go ahead and get started. All right, let me get this going here. I'll wait for a couple folks to join in and see if we can go. All right, let's see here. Okay, so looks like a couple folks are joining in, so let me begin. I got a really cool one for you today. I got a sort of a smorgasbord here. I've had some requests from people who, over the last year, they've had artifacts that they particularly like, and they've asked if I can sort of bring them out. And they don't feel like going through hours and hours of footage that we have of me doing these curator chats. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some highlights for you from the past year. And so you've heard of speed dating. Well, this is speed artifacts. Well, sort of. So without further ado, let's get to it. So these are some of the highlights that people have really dug and have asked about and have wanted to see again. So here we go. So the first thing I'll show you is I'll show you this right here, which is the whale oil lamp. That's it. There it is. There's a whale oil lamp. This belonged to James Monroe. This is about 1800. If you look at it, it has sort of a bulbous body up here, and then it sort of goes down here. It's made out of brass, right? So the brass tacks. Now, you ask yourself, okay, so what? What makes it a whale oil lamp? Why is it special? Well, whale oil lamps, they are distinguished in a few ways. One is that they have a metal stem, and I don't know if you can see this. It's really pretty cool. They have a metal stem that goes from up here down into the actual main reservoir of the body. And that metal stem, the reason for that is because the whale oil that they're using here would have been a little bit thicker than your typical oil that they would have used for the time period back then. So this would have been just a little bit thicker. And so the metal, when it's heated up and it's lit, it would actually heat, and it would keep that liquid down there, would keep it more viscous, right? So it would keep it more movable, so that it would sort of move up and down. And that's what that is. Another distinguishing factor of a lot of whale oil lamps from back in the day was they would have two wicks that would go down. This one does not, but many of them would have two wicks going down. And then another thing is that a lot of times they wouldn't have the glass shield up here. They wouldn't have the glass body that would go up to protect it, but sometimes they did. And saying, well, why whale oil lamp? What was the deal with whale oil? Well, whale oil, obviously coming from the whale industry, which was out of New England, in particular, Bedford, New England, was a huge hot spot of whaling back then. Why would they choose whales? Well, there's really three products that they would get from whales. As distasteful as it might seem to us now, that was their reality back then. The one was, of course, the whale oil that they would distill down from the fat of the whale itself. And then the second one would have been the spermaceti, which would have come from the head of the sperm whale only. So that's why the sperm whales were really sought after, because the head of the... And that whale oil, once that was refined, was a little bit more... it was more refined. It wasn't quite as gooey as the other stuff, and it burned a little bit better. And then the third product they would get from whale is whale bone. It's like, well, what would they use whale bone for? Well, all kinds of stuff. And one of them was, of course, for corsets. So you've all seen corsets with the ribs going into the corset, and the whale bone was one of the main things that they would use back in the day for ribs in the corsets. And so, obviously the whale, and then later as the Industrial Revolution started kicking into America, it's like, why would they keep going after the whales? Well, they would because not just of the lamps itself, but also because of the fat that they would distill down from the whales themselves. The fat they can use as industrial lubricant, oils and things like that for the machinery that was just starting to rise up in the 19th century. So there was really a huge connection between the industry there, not just of the lighting, but also of the Industrial Revolution, where they needed that whale oil to help with the machinery. So there it is, a whale oil lamp, and this was one that was popular among a lot of folks. All right, next, what do we got next? Okay, next we have, this is really cool. I know a lot of you may have these. This is called a cameo, okay? I'll try to hold it up a little bit closer to the camera so you can see it. It's pretty cool. This is a cameo. It belonged to Elizabeth Monroe. She wore it back in the early 1800s. And you can see it's a beautiful depiction there. That's not Elizabeth on the depiction, but it's a really nice carving. Now, what's really cool about these cameos, is that they are made today in much in the same way that they were made back then. How would they make them? Well, I'll tell you. It was really cool. They would take the shell, and I got a little picture here. Okay, you see the shell? All right. So the cameo, the part that you see in the white part. Okay, let me pull this up. The white part is the white part of the shell. You see that? And then the darker part is the darker part of the shell. So what they were doing is I don't know if you can see that. It's reversed, but you should be able to see. And so what they would do is, it was incredible craftsmanship. It really was. I mean, it's spectacular if you think about it. They would take a chunk of shell, they would cut out the shell, and then the craftsmen glue it onto a stick. You can still see them do it. They still do it today. They glue it onto the end of a stick, all right? And then they start carving real slow with their little tiny tools, little precision tools. And they start carving away the white part until they meet the darker part, and that's what gives it that effect. That's what gives it that 3D effect. Not only is it a 3D image, but it also has the difference in the color. So that's really spectacular if you think about it. Think about the craftsmanship of that in order to get it just to the point of the shell where it's dark and just to the point where it's white, and just to sort of keep it in that wonderful balance to give it that beautiful contrast. Now, cameos were very popular. They were very popular with Napoleon and Josephine. And if they were popular with Napoleon and Josephine, therefore they would have been popular with the rest of the country. So these sort of these became very, very popular in the early 1800s. Another reason for it is that Napoleon was going into Italy, into Greece, or into the old world and finding these cameos. They would carve cameos like this back in the Roman and Greek days. And he was finding this, and that is possibly what sparked his interest. So that is what these are, and it's pretty amazing if you think about it. Just think of the craftsmanship of that. So anyway, there it is. All right, next. What else do we got? We have... this is really cool. Actually, let me see if I have a really cool picture. Where is it? There it is. Okay, I got a picture here. Okay, what is this? What's going on here? All right, so this is James Monroe's cane head. Okay, carved out of pure ivory. Look at that. That's the eagle, right? And so this would have gone on James Monroe's cane. So he actually owned this. This is around. This is early 1800s. What's particularly interesting about this is, let me show you this picture, okay? Look at this blow up. Can you see it? Look at the detail. Oh, I'm trying to get it on there. Look at the detail on that head. And all the feathers, all the individual feathers on this tiny little thing. It's amazing. It's really amazing. So a craftsman took the time to carve each individual feathers and all this sort of thing. So canes were very popular back in the day, as you might imagine. You know, you always hear the legend of the cane sword. Is that true? You know, the cane sword. It was like, well, it's not as, it wouldn't have been as prevalent as people think it was. But canes certainly could have been used as a weapon. And there's an interesting story about James Monroe and canes. He had a Secretary of State, when James Monroe was president, he had a Secretary of State named William Crawford. And William Crawford and James Monroe didn't really get along that well. And William Crawford wanted James Monroe to to appoint some of his buddies to various positions and everything. And James Monroe was not all about that. And so he put it off. So James Monroe wasn't doing it. He was kind of putting it off. And William Crawford came to visit him one day. And he came into his office. And William Crawford said, well, what about my appointments? What's going on? James Monroe was like, well, I haven't really had time to review and all that sort of thing. And William Crawford got really upset. And he actually took his cane. William Crawford took his cane and sort of raised it up in a sort of a threatening manner and said, you call him, James Monroe, an infernal scoundrel. Ooh, he called him an infernal scoundrel. So here you have James Monroe, a 6-foot president who was a war veteran, a wounded war veteran, had a bullet in his shoulder from the war, war hero, and he was still in relatively good shape. Well, he was having none of that. So James Monroe sprang to his feet, and he actually grabbed a pair of fireplace tongs. All right, so you can imagine this scene, like these two older guys, you know, in the White House with James Monroe. Or William Crawford holding a cane, you know, open his head, and James Monroe holding a pair of fireplace tongs, you know, like these two guys. And, you know, sort of, and Monroe's like, "What did you say, sir?" You know, all that sort of thing. But it eventually sort of died down. It kind of calmed down, you know, whatever reason that may be. Maybe it's because William Crawford didn't want any of that. Who knows? But Monroe eventually accepted his apology, and things sort of calmed down from there. But anyway, that's a story about James Monroe and canes, and one that sort of kept in his life. But anyway, this was not the cane that William Crawford used. It was one of James Monroe's, but there it is. It's something that's really nerdy and really cool to me is if you look at the acorns. Let me see if I can... Where are they? There they are. If you look at the acorns on the side, that means that this obviously was an oak tree that Eagle's perched on. But also, in my nerdness, I did some research, and these, to me, look like swamp oak acorns, which is kind of interesting, considering DC. So, so there it is. There's the swamp oak acorns on there. So anyway, I just love this piece. It's an amazing piece of artifact. It's an amazing piece of craftsmanship that's been kept all these years. All right, next, what else do we have? Aha! Well, I have some really cool stuff. This one right here was really, really popular. This is Elizabeth Monroe's Nasser, okay? And so what's really, really cool about this Nasser is this was sort of like, in many ways, sort of the Swiss Army knife for Elizabeth Monroe to carry around for ladies back then. It had all kinds of stuff in there, and I'll pull out some of these so you can see them. First of all, you have a spoon, right? You got the spoon just in case. You never know when you need a spoon. You have this, which is quite interesting. What is this? Well, it's actually sort of a notepad, believe it or not. This is actually a piece of ivory. It's a slab of ivory. And people back then, ladies, they can write notes on there, these little graphite notes. In fact, here's a little tip for you. If you ever are in an antique shop and you see one of these old sort of notepad-y slabs of ivory, look on them closely. You might still see the graphite on them. In a lot of these cases, you can still see the graphite. This one you can't, but we do have pieces here that you actually can still see writing of graphite. So it's kind of cool. So they had a sort of a memo pad back then. Here's an extension for a knife and fork set. All right, here's the fork. All right, and here's the extension. So you can actually screw this in, and you would have a nice little knife and fork. And where's the knife? There's the knife in here. Here's the knife part of it. So you can have that. So I wasn't kidding when I said it was like a Swiss Army knife. And then my favorite piece, of course, is this. What is this? It's not a spoon. This is, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, an ear scoop. That's right. It's an ear scoop to clean out your ears. And it's true. I actually looked it up. People used to use these, and yes, people used to get injured when they used these. So I just find that hilarious. I love it. You gotta love history, right? You gotta love it. It's so full of cool little neat little knick-knack things. All right. And then for you sewers and crochet makers out there and all this sort of thing, you might recognize that. And you can tell me what that is. All right. So anyway, there's the Nasser. It was in the cartouche shaped, which is sort of shaped like an Egyptian cartouche. Have you ever seen those? Sort of a shape like that. This became actually a very popular shape in the neoclassical period. So, and this is actually made out of is gilded gold, and this would have been cast. This was not hand carved. This would have been cast. So there's actually kind of a cool thing. We didn't know if this was English or French because they made very similar ones in both England and France, and there was no markings on this of any kind of telling us where it is. So, but one day I was looking through this and I realized that this right here, it's a measuring tool that actually goes into the Nasser, and the measuring tool is in fact in metric. So because it's in metric, because it's metric, that means it would have been France rather than England, because the systems are still in use today. Oh, hey Norman. So the latest is we're hoping March 1st. So we're hoping that can be the thing. Anyway, all right. So there it is in the Nasser. Let's see what else we got here. Next, what else we got? All right. Now, this one I'll show real quick. A lot of people like this one. What is this? Well, it's James Monroe's snuff box. That's right. People used to do snuff all the time, a lot more than they do now. Just powdered tobacco. And yes, they would sniff it. They would just sniff up in there. And something that's kind of cool is he's got inlaid ivory up on the top. And it's kind of cool how they inlaid. Say this is the surface, right? They would carve into it, and then they would lay actually into the carving itself the other piece, and then they would smooth out the top so it's flat. And that's how they do that with the inlay. It's a little more complex, but that's sort of the basic idea. A lot of people requested this one. This is really cool too. What is this? This is actually a salt container. It's really amazing. They call it a salt cellar, and it's made out of silver. I'll hold it up a little bit closer. You can see it's beautiful work with the glass in there. So just real simple, real quick. The salt would go in here, and you would pinch it out, and you would pinch it into your dishes. So nowadays we have shakers, right? Where we just sort of shake very, we want more salt. We don't want just to pinch the salt out. We want to dump it on there. But back in the day, they would pinch the salt out. Although I guess they could theoretically dump it if they really wanted to. But a salt shaker belonged to James Monroe, and beautifully conserved. All right, so there's that one. Okay, a lot of people really wanted to see this again. Now I'll bring these out. These are James Monroe's flatware, and I'll sort of hold it up here, but I'll pull it out so you can get a better look. Look at this. Flatware owned by James Monroe, and this is it would have been a dessert set made in England. And so this is pretty amazing. You see what here? You have mother of pearl on here, which means a mother of pearl that size. Mother of pearl comes, of course, from the oyster shells. Comes from the shell itself, right? And so in order to have a mother of pearl this big, you would have had to have some massive, massive shells. So that's pretty impressive, the craftsmanship on that. But what I love about it is all these different maker's marks. Oh, you have James Monroe's, the griffin on there. You have the sign on there, if you can see it. But you have all these different maker's marks. You have date. You have the town in which it was made. You have the maker itself. And you have the England trademark certifying that it's sterling silver, which sterling silver, which means it would be 92.5% silver, if I'm not mistaken. But what I love about that is we think we're bureaucratic now. Well, yeah, we are. But they were just as bureaucratic back in the day. Look at all these maker marks on here. And it's pretty amazing. Anyway, so a lot of people wanted to see that again. So there it is. The flatware of James Monroe. All right. Now this one, I'm going to pull this out here. I love this piece. I know it seems boring maybe, but I love it. Here it is. One of James Monroe's gloves. And what I love about this was that it looks like a glove that you might see today, right? You might go to Walmart and buy a glove like this. I mean, it doesn't look any different than gloves that we have now. And so I love just the craftsmanship of that. And I don't know if you can see, but really tiny, delicate sewing marks on there, or the sewing is just really tiny loops. And this is made out of doe skin. And so a lot of people, they wonder about the tanning industry in the U.S. in America back in those days, in the early 1800s. Well, it wasn't as prevalent as other places, but there was a tanning industry, and a lot of the, we may not have had the infrastructure that other countries did, but what we did have was a lot of natural resources. And what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about deer, right? We had a lot of deer, and we still have a lot of deer. So they would use doe skin in a lot of cases to make materials like this. And so there was actually a big tanning industry down in Norfolk in Virginia, if anyone's ever been down in that area. But once again, I'll just show you this to you real quick, because I'll turn to the other side here. because I just love how modern looking this is. But nope, this thing is well over 200 years old, and it looks like it could be bought at Sears. I love it. All right, got a couple more things for you. This one was really popular for some reason, but this here was a bottle that belonged. This was a. I'll show you this real quick. But this bottle was found on. Actually, I'll go back to that. But this is a bottle from the 1700s that was belonged to the Monroe's family, and people were wondering about it because it has this big bottom here on the top, this kick that they call on the bottom here. What they would do is they would blow. And I think there's a show now on Netflix called Blown Away or something like that, where you can blow, and they show the glass blow, and they would gather glass from out of the forge, out of the furnace, and they would gather gobs of glass on the end of the metal pipes and blow it out. And so they would blow out to make these shapes of these glasses. And that's what that is. But particularly people were wondering about the bottom, the kick on the bottom, why that is there. Well, there's a couple of different reasons why it possibly could be there. One is for structure, to make it a little bit more stable, the glass itself. Another is for whenever sitting, it makes it a little less surface room on the bottom, so it won't bobble around as much. And so that's another possible reason. But then another reason that came up, which is kind of interesting, is if you're storing these on the side and you store a bunch of them, it makes it easier to turn them, because you have to turn wine bottles whenever you're storing them, to turn them with your fingers by holding it in between here. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So there it is, a bottle that was owned by the James Monroe family, and very, very old. All right. Okay, so the final thing I'll show you, one of my favorites, I might be a little biased, is this fellow right here. A lot of people love this one. Here it is. The court sword of James Monroe. All right, I'll hold it up and I'll just sort of pass it along through here, this bad boy right here. All right, this was owned by James Monroe. It's the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's a small sword, which was sort of the descendant of the rapier. It's called a small sword. It actually, it's hard to see, but I'll sort of turn a little bit, where it has a triangular blade that helps with support. So it's a little bit stiffer. It's much lighter, much faster. This one, it has cut steel handle. So what they would do is they would forge the blade, and they would have the tang that runs all the way through and then to the pommel, and then the pommel secured onto the tang and peened. I don't know if you can see, but it's peened on the end there. And that's what holds the handle in place. So this is cast steel on here. And the blade itself would have been about 1060 steel, which means it had a carbon content of about 0.16. And so people ask about that. It's like, well, why would they have these? Well, they were decorative. Yes, they were definitely decorative. But they were also, back in those days, it's quite possible you might come into a conflict. Even if you're just sort of walking around. And so these both were decorative and were functional. But I just love this piece. This is the court sword of James Monroe. All right. Dare I do a quick flash of all the artifacts I'll show? I will. Here we go. The oil lamp that belonged to James Monroe. All right. A salt cellar that belonged to James Monroe. There it is. Okay. The Nasser that belonged to Elizabeth Monroe that has all kinds of cool stuff in it. There it is. All right. The cane head of James Monroe, eagle head made out of ivory, carved. There we go. The bottle that belonged to the James Monroe family. There we go. And, of course, the flatware, mother of pearl with silver. There we go. The glove that looks modern but actually did belong to James Monroe. There's that. Quick review. And the snuff box that belonged to James Monroe. And then I think, finally, the cameo that belonged to Elizabeth Monroe. There it is. All right. So there it is. Highlights of what people have been requesting. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, check our Facebook page. Maybe give this video a share and a like. That really helps out with the algorithms and all that stuff, so you can share it. That would be absolutely wonderful. And go to our events page, and on our and if you go to Facebook, you see all kinds of really cool stuff that we have coming up. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time. All right, bye.